Alrighty, I have the top of the hour here. Good morning, everyone. My name is Justin Pullen, and I am the chair-elect of the Board for Early Career Professionals. And I would like to welcome you to today's webinar on going through a career event early in your career. Today, we have a panelist of meteorologists across the broadcast and operational meteorology sectors that are in various stages of their career, and they will be here today to share their stories on a major career from early in their careers. Today we have Melissa Huffman, who works for the NWS. Her career event was Hurricane Harvey that impacted Southeast Texas in 2017. We have John Morales from the broadcast sector in Miami, Florida, and he has two events that he will share today. Hurricane Hugo in 1989, where he was an NWS employee at the time, and Hurricane Andrew in 1992, where he was only in his second year in his broadcast career. Christina Crow from the NWS, who experienced the April 27, 2011 super tornado outbreak across the Southeast, and Elise Smith from the broadcast sector, whose career event was the Jefferson City tornado from 2019. So with that, we will jump right into our stories, and we will start with Christina. Go ahead and take it away.
All right, my audio is good?
Yep.
All right, I always like to double check so I don't do the whole let me talk for 5 minutes on mute and not realize it. Hi, everybody. Good morning, and I don't know, maybe some people are afternoon. My career event so far, I worked at the Huntsville Forecast Office in North Alabama, and the April 27th outbreak was quite the experience. I was a pretty new forecaster. I was in my first full year as a journeyman forecaster at the Huntsville office. And so I was not even a year maybe out from my initial radar training, and had some experience working in Springfield, Missouri, doing some severe weather, but nothing tornadic. I hadn't issued any tornado warnings at that point. I was working the forecast desk. The rotation had it to where a few days before I had started on the long-term forecasting desk. And so I was doing a lot of briefings and forecasting and getting out the message ahead of time and coordinating logistics and things of that sort with folks in our office and neighboring offices to get out the word as we started realizing how big that event was going to be. And what was really interesting was the way the shift schedule worked out. You know, I'd started day shifts on Saturday before a Wednesday event doing the long-term forecasting, and then it was just so to happen that I was going to switch over to short-term and be responsible for radar the day the event was supposed to occur. And I remember leading into that event as we were planning staffing, we had long conversations about who would work what, and I raised the flag for them that, you know, I hadn't ever done radar for an event to even half this scale before, and were they sure they wanted me on there? And that was the key for me, was the trust and confidence that was expressed in my abilities, my training, my experience up to that point, that they said, you know, you won't be alone, and we trust you to do your role, do your part. We have confidence in you. So that was really huge, but also still very intimidating that early in my career, headed into the actual day of the event. The day of the event, I ended up being on radar for something like 12 to 14 hours. We had a early morning overnight round, and we had 2 more rounds that came through during the course of that day. And I came in early that day and was starting to pick up on radar as the midnight shift was getting out of the office, finally getting their break. And while they were kind of doing their shift change briefings and some discussions about when they might have to come back in, I had been watching their warnings for clearing out that first round. And I remember noticing that, hey, there's this cell that's got a tornado warning on it, that the cell isn't going to be out by the time that warning expires, so we need to issue a new warning. And I remember looking around at the office and saying, hey guys, like, do we need to issue a warning? Should I be issuing a warning? Should I do the tornado warning on this? And it was this moment of, oh yeah, I'm the person now. And so I kind of got over the fear and just got that first warning out and went from there. And we had such a great team. It was such a collaborative effort, but it was an exhausting day that day. And we'll talk more later about like lessons I've learned probably, but I think I also just want to hit on in this initial story was it wasn't just the event itself. It was working after the event. That is the most amount of time I've spent on storm surveys, and there was a whole added impact in that event from we lost power in North Alabama for about a week following the event. And so we were kind of part of the event itself, even though, you know, most folks in the office didn't have damage to our homes, but we were still impacted by the event because of the power outage and what that all meant for trying to get survey vehicles out and get gas for them and get food in the office. And we were running on generator, but our internet connection wasn't working because of other outages. And so the flexibility that you have to figure out when nothing goes as you kind of plan it to was an experience that I think formed a lot of what we did and how we worked as an operations team after that. And it was also amazing to just be part of that community and understand what a community goes through and how they pull together and how they solve problems and grow from it in the aftermath. So that's kind of the gist of my story. And I guess I'll pass it back along to the next person.
All right, thank you, Christina. And for those of you just joining, our panelists will go ahead and share their stories, and then there will be plenty of time on the back end for some Q&A. So be thinking of some questions to ask our panelists once we conclude sharing our stories. Next up on the docket for today will be Elise Smith. Elise, go ahead and take it away.
Hello, everyone. You can all hear me okay, like Christina did? Okay, perfect. Yes, my name is Elise Smith, and I'm currently a meteorologist at the NBC affiliate in Buffalo, New York. But before I was here in the lake effect capital of the country, I was serving in my first job as a meteorologist in Jefferson City, Missouri. So today I'll be talking about my story in relation to the Jefferson City tornado, which happened on the night of May 22nd, 2019. It was a high-end EF3 tornado that impacted a part of Missouri that had never seen above an EF1 tornado before. Even though Missouri tornadoes, there are some pretty significant tornadoes throughout history across the state, this particular community had never seen a tornadic event to this scale or this magnitude before. And a little background about me that day, I was currently serving as the morning meteorologist at my TV station. So throughout the entire morning and even into the afternoon, I was communicating the forecast on air, going over, the outlooks and communicating the risk and the potential that was there for strong tornadoes, which kind of to Christina's point, the confidence that my chief helped me instill in how I was communicating this event, because as someone in their early career, only 2 years into their career, this was the first time I was communicating that there would be tornadoes that day and how to communicate that appropriately without putting fear into putting fear into the forecast or things like that. But after that, my unique story, my unique perspective is that I went through this event with my community. So as the morning meteorologist at 11:08 at night, when the tornado warning for Jefferson City was issued, I was asleep and was woken up by my phone going off and the tornado siren that was up on the top of the hill near where I lived in Jefferson City. And as much as I want to say I was like an action figure and like jumped out of bed and was ready to go, I was asleep and this happened. So I went through the process of looking at my radar, turning the TV on, figuring out what was going on, helping neighbors take shelter in the basement, taking shelter in the basement. And then eventually I went out and got ready for work, went outside, drove down the road and ran into what would be categorized as high-end EF3 tornado damage about 10 minutes after the tornado went through. And there's nothing that can prepare you for that moment, especially as someone early in your career. You're thinking, you know, as you're going through school and you're going through your training, you're learning how to communicate a tornado warning from the studio, or from the perspective of like, I'm going to be the person, you know, communicating this in this particular way. You couldn't imagine being the first person to arrive at the scene of a, you know, potentially catastrophic tornado with, you know, buildings are gone, people are climbing out of debris, police are just arriving at the scene. So that's what my story and my experience is going to revolve around today. One thing that helped me get through that night and reporting for about 2 hours live from the scene of the disaster, the aftermath of a strong tornado, was when I got there. I didn't know what to do, but as police were getting there and law enforcement was arriving and emergency crews were getting there, one of the first things I did was I went up to one of them and said, how could I help? What could I do? And something that really grounded me for that day, now acting as, you know, more of a reporter and a first responder, was he told me to stay in my lane. We're going to take care of what we need to take care of, and you take care of what you need to take care of. So that really helped me that night put into perspective what we were about to go through, what my job was to communicate to the community what was happening in the aftermath. And then after I was there at the scene for about 2 hours, I went and then did the entire morning show and the forecast through the afternoon for the next day. So that's just a little bit about my story. I'm really looking forward to sharing how I got over some of the trauma that was left after seeing what I saw and hearing what I heard, and how I've since recovered and some of the efforts we've put in place since then. So that's just a little bit about my experience and my story, and I will send it to the next person.
Alrighty, thank you for sharing your story, Elise. Next up, we have Melissa Huffman, who experienced Hurricane Harvey in 2017. Take it away, Melissa.
Thanks, Justin. I'll check my audio too, make sure we're all good. All right, excellent. So I'm Melissa Huffman, and while I'm currently in the Corpus Christi office, a few years ago, I was in the National Weather Service's Houston-Galveston office. So in 2017, I worked Hurricane Harvey. And for those of you who are not necessarily familiar with Hurricane Harvey, Harvey made landfall on the Middle Texas coast as a Category 4 hurricane. And this was the first major hurricane to make landfall in Texas since 1983. So it was a really big deal. Now, Harvey moved inland, stayed inland for about 48 hours. And while it was inland and beginning to come back out into the Northwest Gulf of Mexico, produced several significant heavy rainfall events across the Houston metro. And if you're not familiar with Texas, Houston has about 4 million people in it. So very densely populated area, lots of concrete, lots of heavy rain falling on concrete. You can put that together and know that it produced a very significant flood event for a lot of people. Now, after all was said and done, there was over 40 inches of rain dropped in a 7-day period on the Houston metro. And this is going along a time where there's also still a tornado threat unfolding for the city. So Houston actually was under a tornado watch for about 4 days throughout the course of Harvey. Harvey itself, the actual hazards it was producing, occurred over about a 7-day period in Southeast Texas. So this was a long duration event for all of us. And if you're not familiar with how the National Weather Service postures for these events, typically within a tropical storm or a hurricane, offices will move to a 12-hour shift staffing structure. So you'll be 12 on, 12 off. And this is to maximize staffing and make sure that we can cover everything that needs to be covered throughout the course of a tropical cyclone. Now, this meant that leading up to Harvey, we're starting these 12-hour shifts. You're working radar, hydrology, whatever needs to be covered. And then you're still having to deal with kind of the recovery efforts that began. So this was, again, a long duration event for a lot of us. Throughout the course of Harvey, I started out in the days leading up to it, providing partner briefings. And then as we got closer to landfall, so Harvey made landfall on August 25th. This was a Friday. So I transitioned to radar and then worked radar for a few days within the event. And then when the significant hydrologic effects began to take place, I transitioned into a hydrologic support role. So I got to see many different facets of Harvey. One of the things that for me was really unique, and Christina and Elise have also talked about this, is you're not only working the disaster, but if you're able to leave work, you're then going home and living the disaster. So you don't really have any kind of separation from this very high stress event that's unfolding for your community, which was kind of a difficult thing for me to process at the time. I had worked what I had considered to be big weather events up to Harvey, and then Harvey came in and blew everything out of the water and completely changed kind of what those personal thresholds I had for a big event. But it was something that I still cannot sing the praises enough of my coworkers from that event, because if it wasn't for them, I don't know if I would have, emotionally been through it, because you really do pull on the people around you to help with these really big events. So I don't have too much more to say to my story beyond that, but my career event was Harvey, and it's certainly something I won't be forgetting anytime soon.
Thank you for sharing your story, Melissa. And finally, we have John, who experienced two infamous hurricanes in a 2-year period across 2 sectors. So this will be a pretty interesting story. Take it away, John.
Thanks, Justin. Appreciate that. Hello, everybody. Good to be here with you all. Yeah, so I mean, I've been around the block a bit. These stories date back quite a few decades, but they indeed were defining moments in my career. And of course, we're all sharing these because we want you to be able to be ready for that moment and leverage your best skill set to take advantage of those potentially defining moments, which can launch your career in very good directions, right? In my case, in 1989, I was at the National Weather Service Forecast Office. Yes, I did say WSFO. I am that old. In San Juan, Puerto Rico. As you know, they're responsible for the U.S. Virgin Islands as well as the Puerto Rican archipelago. And around that time, I believe I was already a lead forecaster. But here's the deal: we had an MIC, we had a deputy MIC. There was no such thing as a SOO, a Science and Operations Officer, and WCM, Warning Coordination Meteorologist. Those positions had not been created in the National Weather Service back then. So in addition to that, the media in Puerto Rico was not very keen on reporting the weather. And if it hadn't been for a 1986 mudslide and flash flood event that sadly killed triple digits in terms of fatalities, I don't think there would have been, other than maybe the news anchor at the end of the newscast saying, and in weather, there's a 20% chance of rain for tomorrow. Have a good night. Stay classy, San Juan, or whatever it is news anchors say at the end of their broadcasts. Well, so there was a fledgling broadcast meteorology field, but not quite robust, not mature yet. And many, many news reporters and radio stations would simply rely on the National Weather Service Office to provide this emergency information, as Hurricane Hugo, the first hurricane to make landfall in Puerto Rico in 30 years, believe it or not, it had been since the 1950s, was approaching. Well, the MIC was busy with all his, administrative stuff. The deputy MIC was either on or off shift. And because I had some ability in communications, just simply because when I was in college, I was part of the student-run radio station, WVBR in Ithaca, New York. I had a little bit of experience, felt a little bit more comfortable in helping the media out when they came in the door or when we had phone calls or whatnot. Well, as Hugo was bearing down on Puerto Rico, not only was I on the media a lot in 2 languages, English and Spanish, but also then they activated the emergency broadcast system. That's what it used to be called back then, the EAS today. And in 2 languages, I am broadcasting across the entire spectrum of electronic news media, or any station in Puerto Rico. All right, so the hurricane hits. We all go through the recovery process of, the aftermath of a hurricane. And about 4 or 5 weeks after the hurricane had come through and we were starting to get up on our feet, I got a phone call from a local news director from a newscast, who in this fledgling effort to get more broadcast meteorology on the air and in the newscasts in Puerto Rico was interested in perhaps me pursuing that. Now, it didn't work out. I didn't want to leave my NOAA career. I felt it was the right thing at the moment for me not to do that. So I remained as a National Weather Service lead forecaster in San Juan. But this news director, she really planted the seed. And I started to look for opportunities, having been recognized for perhaps having the ability to do this every day on TV. Eventually, after leaving San Juan, I went to NCEP. I was the chief of the South American desk for all of about 5 weeks. But while in Washington, I got called by a TV station that I had interviewed with previously in Miami, and I took the job as chief meteorologist for the Univision station. This is Spanish language newscast in Miami. And I did that in 1991, which leads to the second part of my story. In 1991, there were no broadcast meteorologists, there were no weathercasters in Spanish language newscasts that held a degree in meteorology in any station anywhere in this country. They were all, I don't know, disc jockeys and people who could carry that weather segment in kind of a jovial way, so that people would be entertained and get the information at the same time. When the station took this chance on me, I became the first degreed meteorologist on Spanish language TV in the US. And a year later, Hurricane Andrew in 1992 threatens and eventually strikes South Florida, as you know, one of the strongest hurricanes ever to strike the US. My hypothesis is that it could have been any degreed Spanish-speaking meteorologist who would have guided and carried the audience through this horrific impending emergency. And they would have had tremendous success because the audience just never had an opportunity to have a knowledgeable person guide them through such a big threat like this one. People were so appreciative of having had a knowledgeable person on the air that, I mean, my career was cemented on Spanish language TV anyway. I mean, after Hurricane Andrew in 1992, it truly was a career defining event, because had there been any doubts about maybe not, me not being as fun as a radio disc jockey doing the weather or other options that they had, I think those doubts were cast away, and I basically could have stayed on that job as long as I wanted to. I ended up spending 18 years in Spanish language TV, a dozen in Univision, 6 in Telemundo, and now I am in my, I'm about to be 12 years now as the chief for the NBC-owned station here in Miami. A couple of details that I think are important to relay as well. In the case of Puerto Rico, I had a certain ability or skill set that other meteorologists, or for that matter, meteorological technicians that were in the office at the time, did not have. Whether I recognized it or not, I knew that I liked to do that. I liked to be the communicator, the de facto spokesperson for the National Weather Service in San Juan. And it really opened up some doors at the time. And then in the case of the TV opportunity, it's kind of the other way around. Here I have this skill set that nobody else has ever had on Spanish language TV, and now I can apply that. I mean, it doesn't necessarily say anything about how good of a meteorologist I am or not. I'm telling you, anybody with a degree, I think, that spoke Spanish would have done just as well. But it certainly was an opportunity that really kept me successfully in this profession for a long, long time. So those are my two stories, and I guess we can talk some more as we open it up for questions.
All righty, John. Thank you for sharing both of your stories there. And as a reminder to our audience, as we move into the Q&A session, feel free to submit your questions in the chat window, and we will record those and get to them throughout the course of our conversation. But to start the conversation off, one of the themes across the board with our panelists is that each of you essentially, you worked your career event, but then you also had to live it in your community. And as we all know, working an event itself and dealing with the post-event trauma is a major part of the experience post-event. But when that's compounded with you not really being able to disconnect, that really adds to that experience. So this is a two-part question for everyone on the panel. Were there any experiences that you had working the event or experiencing it as a member of the community that were surprising? And what did you learn through your experience, and what advice would you give someone that may be experiencing post-traumatic stress?
Well, nobody's jumping in. Hurricanes are hurricane aftermaths are. I've been through so many already. They all kind of blur. It's a blur now, but it truly is kind of a community event, right? Everybody's trying to help each other out. The San Juan event, the Puerto Rico in general event was difficult. But I mean, I don't know. I don't feel traumatized by it. I don't think I was traumatized by it at the time. Andrew, I will never forget the images of southern Miami-Dade County. And I'm sure there's people that can tell tornado stories, from the aftermath of big tornadoes striking cities and communities. But in the case of Hurricane Andrew, you went to southern Miami-Dade County, and it was just horrific. It was just so terrible. The damage was still so widespread. So I've never forgotten that. I don't know if that means that I've got PTSD or not. I doubt it. So I mean, those are my experiences. I think the whole community lives through them together. A lot of people, for a short little while, people have the spirit of collaborating, and then that kind of fades away. But I don't know. Just to break the ice, I thought I'd say that.
I'll jump in off of that, John. You can all hear me okay, correct? Yeah, perfect. Okay. I think the post-event trauma that I experienced is really a root of my story and something I want to share, because it's, and Justin, as you alluded to, it surprised me that I was dealing with some of the stress after the event. And it happened in a few ways. So the first thing was when I had to go and take shelter when a tornado emergency was issued for Jefferson City. And this supercell, the storm, was riding up into Jefferson City along one of our major highways, as it seemed. And I lived on the left side of the highway, and the storm at the time was on the left side of the highway. So I knew it was going to be close. And I had radar scope zoomed in as far as I could to see, okay, well, it might not hit me, but it could hit someone else. And I'll never forget, at like 11, just after 11:45, we lost power. There was a power flash, and my heart sank because I knew I wasn't going to get hit, but someone else probably was. And then that led me to, once it was all clear enough for a meteorologist, I hopped in my car and drove down the road, and then just ran right into the tornado damage. And John, as you alluded to as well, I will never forget those images and what I saw that night. But one of the things that also stuck with me for a few days after, living in such close proximity to some of the worst damage that happened in Jefferson City, I would hear police sirens at night. And I would assume that they were active police cars driving to the damage. We had citywide curfews, so they might be enforcing that. But it wasn't until a night or two later when I realized I didn't just hear police sirens, but I heard a car horn just consistently. And I remembered that night there was a 2x4 through the windshield of a U-Haul that had pinned the car horn and it kept going off the entire night. So that's when I realized there were lingering audio and visual effects on me that I couldn't get out of my head when I was trying to fall asleep at night. And thankfully, I had a close friend of mine who was going through clinical psychology at the time, and I was able to call her and ask her, how do I get through this? I'm dealing with some after effects of covering this disaster in my community. What can I do to move on from this? And that's really the advice I would give to someone when you're going through these events, is check in on yourself. Take the time to accept that you and your community have just gone through something, and take the time to put forth the effort to get through that, because in the long run, you'll thank yourself for it. And everyone goes through trauma in different ways, and everyone recovers from trauma differently. But if you can find a way that is helpful for you, whether it's talking to someone, writing things in a journal, etc., that's something you'll be thankful for in the future. So from covering now this disaster in that way, where I wasn't necessarily in the studio giving the warnings away from my community, I was right in the thick of it right after it happened, seeing and hearing the things I did that night. That is the biggest advice I could give to someone who might be going through something similar, or goes through something similar in their early career.
Yeah, and I'll jump in following Elise. For me, the thing that I don't think that I expected was kind of the role that adrenaline played in how I responded to the event. So we had this big rain band set up the night of August 26th. And so this was the night when, Houston got its initial surge of heavy rain, 20 inches dumped, over the course of 12 hours. And I can remember I was on the day shift during this time. You go through the poor midnight shift. That crew dealt with some incredible things. The messaging from that night was definitely multi-hazard. So you're trying to figure out how to communicate to people. You've got, but now you also have flash flooding. So you're having to make a decision. Am I on the lowest floor of my house, which is now beginning to flood to protect from the tornado, or am I going up higher? And we also had the issue of homes beginning to flood to the point where people are getting trapped in their attics and they're unable to get out. So you just have this very extreme messaging. So when I woke up the next morning, I've got a bunch of text on my phone for friends that I had who were trapped in their homes, trying to figure out if the Coast Guard could rescue them, how they were going to get out. And then it's, how am I getting to work this morning? How am I going to get there? So I had to walk through floodwater, which I don't recommend, to get picked up by another forecaster from the office to make it in. And then you have this whole long shift where you're dealing with the aftermath of people who still need to be rescued and are still essentially living through a war zone. And you're trying to understand, how to reach them. Our Twitter and Facebook feeds were overwhelmed because 911 services actually ended up collapsing during Harvey. And so people thought, hey, I'll reach out to the weather service because I know I've talked to them before. So you're going through and you're seeing all of these cries for help on social media. You're still trying to work an active warning situation and prepare your partners for a series of additional events that are expected to come. And I'm just kind of running on nervous energy through this whole day of, okay, radar is good for right now. What's the next thing that we need to do? How do we work on this? And granted, there's still 10 other people in the operations area with me at this time who are all working in tandem to make sure that we're getting this information out. And then by the time that I got done with this shift, it was just like, I have got to get out of a break. Like, I need something. But everything was flooded, so we couldn't go home. The National Guard had arrived because the Houston office is actually located with the Galveston County Office of Emergency Management. So not only do you have a whole bunch of new people coming in, so the building basically turned into this combination emergency operations center, staging area, just kind of this. It was one of the only places in the county that wasn't flooded. So that's where you're going to put all of your resources, right? Just because it's dry. So there was really no place for you to go at that point. So I can remember I just found a little area, a forecaster, Brian Kyle. I will sing his praises until I die because he really was critical throughout this whole event, but he was working on a marine briefing. And I just found a little chair and sat down and cried behind him, but I did it quietly so that he didn't know what was going on. But I just needed that release because you had dealt with so much throughout the course of the event. And so that's kind of one of the things that I would love to tell an early career professional is it is okay if your job makes you cry. Like it's going to happen. There's no shame in it. Sometimes you just have to find that emotional release, and that's what happens. But I think we'll talk, through the course of this, that there's some healthy ways to really begin to process what you've been dealing with. But you may very well be put into a situation where you're just like, I don't know how to go through everything that I've experienced. And sometimes that adrenaline runs out, and then you're just kind of left with, well, what's keeping me going now? So yeah, I guess, don't be afraid to cry. It's okay to have emotions and feelings. I know we don't like to talk about that very much. I'm not a feeler, and I really don't. But again, sometimes you respond to these big events in ways that you just didn't really expect. And that was one of them for me.
And I'll chime in too that two things that surprised me, and I think it goes on the adrenaline thing, Melissa, of time was weird. Like I remember time passing both very, very slowly and very, very fast during an event, where it's, you feel like you were on radar forever, but then it's also at the same time, like you look up and 3 hours have gone by. And so time passes really weird. And I remember being surprised by that. And also being surprised by, and again, with the adrenaline of how much I could do that I didn't realize I could do. I think that's something that event boosted my confidence in a lot of ways of until you're tested, you don't really know how much you can handle. And so I think that was a positive that came out of the event for me. On the damage assessment side, the thing that surprised me the most was, when you're going through school and if you're a storm chaser, you watch videos and you see pictures of tornado damage and aftermath. When you're learning how to assess the damage, you're looking at pictures of damage. I was not expecting the actual being there to be so different than what you see in pictures. It smells and sounds. Those are the things that pictures don't give you. And I think that's even going back the other day, I was looking back at some old damage pictures from the event, and they just look so tame compared to what it is actually to experience that in real life. So I wish I had been warned about that before I got to that point. I think also what I've learned over time was and this was 10 years ago that I went through the event. Nobody talked about the emotional impact stuff that we're talking about right now. And we had a counselor come to the office like a week and a half after the event, something like that, who came, it was from part of the employee EAP, and I'm blanking on the acronym, Employee Assistance Program, that they had a counselor come in to talk to the office to kind of help us out. But it felt weird and felt very, people weren't really embracing it. Like we didn't really know what it was. It wasn't something people talked about. And so over the course of the next 6 months, I remember, especially at a conference, the conferences in the following year, when I would go and I would just have little conversations with people who'd been around longer. And I would very tentatively bring up is it weird that this experience impacted me? Like I have these very vivid memories and stuff. And I was amazed. Not a single person that I talked to told me no, if they'd been around for a while. Every single person was like, oh yeah, let me tell you about this event that I worked, that I can tell you everything that happened to that event. It still sticks with me. I have dreams about it, blah, blah, blah. So I was shocked at the amount of exposure we all have and that nobody was talking about it. And so I realized in the introductions, I didn't explain what I do now. I no longer work at the Huntsville Forecast Office. I've bopped around different parts of Weather Service, and I'm currently at the Weather Service Leadership Academy, and part of my role, I have been involved with developing training for critical incident stress management. The Chief Learning Officer, John Ogren, was one of the first people I remember talking to about this after the event, and he has always been very supportive of recognizing the need to get people trained. And so now we have a behavioral health and wellness officer. Lieutenant Commander Valerie Gardner is now part of the Weather Service team. She's from the Public Health Service. She, as a licensed clinical social worker, she knows all about this. She's worked disasters. And so we're getting more resources and trying to make this a normal part of the conversation. And so it makes me happy to think about, it's okay to talk about this now. And it's okay to be different, have different reactions to the event. The person sitting next to you experiencing the exact same thing may not be fazed by it, but you might. And it could be a major hurricane, or it could be one little tornado spin up that kills somebody in your area. It doesn't have to be a big thing, and even if it is a big thing, it may not affect you. And so every way you react is okay, is a piece of advice that I'd give, that it's okay if you don't feel that you were impacted, but what's not okay is to not check in with yourself and make sure you're okay, no matter what kind of the event is that you're dealing with. So that's my little piece of advice.
So Christina, that's the perfect segue into one of the audience questions, and this is for all of the speakers. How have your experiences, or have they changed the focus or trajectory of your career?
I would say no. I mean, I still, after Harvey, seeing how the information we provided enabled people to make decisions to, protect lives. No, I mean, I still was very much in love with the path that I was on, and in providing, decision support services, which is a big movement in the Weather Service right now. And like Christina, I didn't explain what I do. I'm a meteorologist for the Corpus Christi office, and yeah, I mean, Harvey for me just reaffirmed that I was in the right spot. I knew there were going to be hard moments ahead, but that I was on the right path, and this is where I was supposed to be. So it really just kind of confirmed the path that I had set out.
And for you, Melissa, in your new role as warning coordination meteorologist at the Corpus Christi office, you all actually had one of the first hurricanes of the 2020 season with Hurricane Hannah. How did the experiences with Harvey kind of influence how you now, as a leader of an office, or one of the leaders of an office, how did that influence the way you worked with your forecasters at the office there?
So it made me much more cognizant of actually checking in with people. Harvey, there was so much to do that I feel like we just kind of felt like, okay, I've got my station, and I've just got to sit here and focus on this for the next 12 hours. And in Hannah, I was able to kind of take that as recognizing of, okay, I have a break in between my briefing cycle. I need to be going out into ops to check on the forecasters and see, are you doing okay? Do you need a bathroom break? Do you need a snack? And I know that these sound like very basic, kind of silly questions, but you can't underestimate the role of workplace hygiene, especially when you're in a really high stress event like that. And so for me, it's just made me more cognizant of, sometimes people just need you to ask, are you okay? Do you need anything? To give them kind of that mental break to go, oh, actually, yeah, I do need something, or I am hungry, or, whatever else. So it's made me much more thoughtful in my approach to operations, for sure.
I will add that I don't know how much it changed maybe my career path, but I know it changed how I did warnings because of the sheer volume of storms that we had on radar in our county area. I went and did a research project in Norman a couple of years after, and they commented it was the first time I realized my warning style had changed, because I was just in this approach. Basically, most of my experience was in very high-paced morning operations, so the way I approached things was very different and weird, evidently, but they liked it. So and I think I always knew I wasn't going to be in operations for my entire career. And so I don't think that experience changed that at all for me, but it did, like Melissa said, it reinforced for me the importance of what we do. And I think it changed a little bit of my perspective and approach in my career towards, I'm still fascinated by weather, but not in the same way I was in college. I remember just being so jazzed on our storm chase team going out and following storms. I still don't have any interest in storm chasing because I've seen what it does. And I think maybe I have a little more respect for the power of Mother Nature than I had in college. So I think that's what's changed for me, and just understanding the importance of what we do for our partners in the community. And I mean, 10 years ago, we had a two-way radio that we were connecting with all of our partners. So we operated a little bit more like what's pretty normal now across the Weather Service with the engagement with our partners, and just the conversations with the emergency managers and how much they rely on us and the importance of what we do. That, I think, has really been reinforced because of that event for me, and that plays into how I approach a lot of the training we do, and the value, and also the value of our non-meteorologists, because that was a thing with events of this scale. You know, it's all hands on deck. So your IT staff, your electronic staff, your admin staff are all there and part of the team. And I think that really opened my eyes to the importance and value of everybody on the team.
Christina, I'll jump in off of that because I think it's obvious, you know, now I'm not in Jefferson City anymore. So I have changed jobs in my career and locations in my career, but what has stayed with me since the Jefferson City tornado is what Christina mentioned, is the communication and collaboration across sectors. So that's how I see it. Because for a high-end EF3 nocturnal tornado to hit a part of Missouri, the capital of Missouri, highly populated for that region, who had never seen a disaster like that, of that magnitude, for no one to die in that storm. Yes, you would like to think some of there is luck involved with that, of course, but when we would talk to the community and listen to their stories, people received the warning and took shelter. And that's all you could ask for in an event like this, is for people to heed the warnings and listen to the people who have the skill set and the knowledge who are communicating this to you. And it wasn't just, and this had taken years for the local National Weather Service offices to meet with broadcasters, to meet with emergency managers and local law enforcement, to put together plans in place if a disaster would hit this part of Missouri. And the community too, May 22nd is also an infamous day because that's also the anniversary of the Joplin tornado. So people within central Missouri had also seen the impacts of that. And many of them, we found out, had also gone and down recovery efforts and were part of teams that were there in the community in Joplin after that tornado. So the awareness of the community was huge. But of course, then something I'm really passionate about now is finding ways to reach across different sectors during big weather events. Here would be lake effect snowstorms or things of that magnitude. But just some advice I would give to someone who might be going into their first job or a new job in a new location as a broadcaster is make the effort to reach out to your local National Weather Service office and just send a quick introduction, or learn how, see if you can, if a reporter has connections with the local law enforcement or emergency managers, just see if you can get their contact information and say, hey, I'm the new meteorologist here, and might be working with you in the future if, when, and where. So that would be some advice too I would give to someone new who my chief at the time in Jefferson City, he just kind of instilled that in us. And that was very evident through many of the, what are they called? The integrated warning meetings that you would have with the local National Weather Service office and things like that, or even the spotter talks. we were always there as, part of the community, the local community and the weather community. So being involved in that regard too is, I think, really, really important.
John, I have one question for you. So you mentioned in your story in the broadcast portion that you were the first Spanish language teaching meteorologist in the U.S., correct?
Yeah, first degree meteorologist in Spanish language media in the US, yes.
So with Hurricane Andrew and you being in that role, what was the aftermath like? Did that inspire a movement for more Spanish language speaking meteorologists to be hired in that role in the years afterward?
Big time, big time. I mean, the first reaction was from the competing Telemundo station in town. So I worked for Univision at the time. The Telemundo-owned station scrambled to try to find anyone they could put on TV. They ended up finding a Cuban meteorologist who had immigrated to the US many years ago. He was probably about my age at the time he started at the Telemundo station. My age right now, I mean, right? So I was 30 at Univision. They put him at Channel 51, and I don't know, that lasted a few years. But what did start to happen, indeed, is that other stations across the US really started to try to find ways to find degreed Spanish-speaking meteorologists to put on TV. Now, that wasn't easy. In the 1990s, the Weather Channel launched something called the Weather Channel Latin America, based in Atlanta, for the cable systems all across Latin America. And because they could not find Spanish-speaking meteorologists residing in the United States, they had to get the special I-9 visas to be able to bring people that are not U.S. citizens, but that can fulfill this job that nobody else in America can do. I mean, that was the dearth of the availability of Spanish-speaking meteorologists at the time. Fast forward to today, and now I can tell you that the Telemundo stations pretty much demand a degree. You have to have a degree to be able to be a weathercaster in their newscasts across the stations in the U.S. Univision is also trying. I don't think they do that all the time, but they try to do that too. Not only are there more Latinos studying it at universities here in the U.S., but there is a very important effort that started, I don't know, I want to say about 15 years ago at University of Puerto Rico, Mayagüez, which is Mayagüez is their kind of their STEM campus, and they had a physics degree which they added a track for meteorology in, and had a lot of young Puerto Rican physicists or scientists, study down the meteorology track, get the needed credits to be able to apply to National Weather Service jobs, or for that matter, present as bona fide calculus and physics-based degree meteorologists on TV. And I can tell you, many meteorologists from UPR Mayagüez are on TV and in the National Weather Service too, across the U.S. So it's been nothing but good things since then, and the field has greatly diversified.
John, I just was going to pipe in. We had University of Puerto Rico students, summer interns, regularly at Huntsville. So there's a nice little connection.
Yeah, good stuff.
One quick follow-up before we get around to our closing question for you, John. Was it difficult to convey the information to a community made up of many people from countries that are not typically affected by hurricanes?
Yeah, but when you when the newscasts go wall-to-wall coverage, and therefore the weather segment is not timed, and I can, I can explain at will and teach with no time constraints. I don't think it's that hard to do. And you explain every threat and why that threat arises and why the hurricane does what it does. And again, I mean, that's part of that skill set that I happen to have at the time, right? What better than a degreed meteorologist to be able to explain these threats and how they're produced and how you might best prepare for them. So it really worked out in that sense, and I think people were carried through the storm in the appropriate way. And I mean, to this day, especially on Facebook, right? For us old folks, I get people thanking me for my work during Hurricane Andrew, 30 years ago. And people will say, particularly if they're posting or commenting on something I've posted for the first time, they'll say, I've been following you since Hurricane Andrew. That's when they started to follow me. So, talk about a career-defining event. Andrew definitely was.
Okay, so we're coming up on the top of the hour, and I realize that a lot of people will have to drop off. If you have any other additional questions that you would like answered, drop them in the chat, and we may be able to get to them a little bit after the top of the hour. But for our last question for our speakers, and this is for everyone, how can meteorologists who are not in the broadcast or operational sectors, or those per se in the trenches, support those that are during the lead up to, during, and following these major events?
Well, I guess what was interesting about my experience at Huntsville was I'd been there as a grad student. And so being there and still being connected to the university program, I was very well connected with a lot of researchers. And I guess jokingly, the number one thing I'd say is don't second guess the operational people, because they make decisions with split seconds time to make that decision. And as a researcher, if you've got 3 hours to pour over the data, yeah, you're going to make a different decision than an operational person might. So being a partner in research and being a partner in and providing the additional insight that you have time to do leading up to and surrounding events is amazing, and having that expertise and collaboration with the academic or private sector is wonderful. And in the aftermath, as you're trying to figure out how to do better the next time, be considerate of the fact that yes, there's split-second decisions that get made, but continue being that partner and working as a collaborative unit. The whole thing is about trying to be better for the next time, and that's, I think, a great way to all partner together.
Yeah, the engagement really begins before the event is even on the horizon. So if you're not in a broadcast or an operational setting, make sure that you're actively engaging with those groups. Elise mentioned integrated warning teams, and these are a really fantastic way to make sure that all of the weather enterprise is on the same page. So yeah, if you have some kind of neat piece of research that you've done, some kind of model that you're working on, share that knowledge, but make sure that you're building these connections before the event. So if you're looking to engage with your local weather service office and you haven't done so, all of them have warning coordination meteorologists, so my counterparts. And if you don't know who that is, email me and I'll get you set up. But make sure that you are actively engaging with them, and then your local broadcasters. I don't know, Elise and John, how many random emails that you guys get through the course of a day, but don't be, and I'm speaking for you guys, but don't hesitate to reach out. Sometimes it's all about kind of making that initial introduction to see how that relationship can really benefit during a career-defining event like the ones that we've talked about.
All righty. Any last words from our panel in the 1 minute that we have left?
Go ahead, John. You got your hand up.
Yeah, I do. I just needed to unmute myself. No, I mean, so I think my main message to those watching that are in early career, you have to know yourself and know, what you're best at. And then you have to be able to recognize when the opportunities are knocking at your door. And you have to be able to allow those opportunities in. Don't be shy. Not a good idea. I mean, even if you are an introvert and shy, just when you're confident about what you know about yourself and what you're good at, there's no reason to be shy, even if you're an introvert. And take the bull by the horns and take those opportunities. If you've been to AMS conferences and Susan Jasko, she's presented for early career professionals as well. And she recommends a book called The Defining Decade. The Defining Decade by Dr. Meg Jay, J-A-Y. And this is a book about that. It's about realizing that if you're in early career, you are at a stage of your life when a lot of what's going to happen down the road, when you're mid-career and late career, professionally and personally, okay, is defined now. No pressure, but don't look at it as pressure, okay? Look at it as truly always being ready to act when you see those opportunities. And this is going to help you down the road and could very well define a very successful career going forward. So that would be my final word here today.
And if I can pipe in.
Oh, go ahead.
One of the things I was going to share was something that I've learned from emergency management of when you're heading into an event, it's not about the plan, it's about the planning. So do your homework, do your training, says the person from training. Do your work and be prepared, make sure you're prepared, but also be flexible. And that's honestly probably one of the best things that you bring to the table as a new person. Yeah, you don't have the history of all these events that you've worked and all of this experience to draw from, but you also don't have all of that experience dragging you down into what should be or what you've done in the past. You are probably one of the most flexible people coming into a new event. Use that as a strength to be able to dive in. My mom always jokes of if somebody's going to have twins, they better have them first because they don't know it's supposed to be that hard. So maybe some of these big events are like that, of being flexible because you don't know it's supposed to be that hard and you're just diving in and doing what you need to do. And the last bit, communicate, communicate, communicate. Doing these events is not an individual sport, it's a team effort. And so you've got to be able to talk with your team, whether that's inside your office or with partners. So those are the things I'd recommend.
And jumping off of both of those things, one thing as being a part of this weather community and how we're evolving together is the amount of people who reached out to me during the event and directly after, just saying they were there for me and if I needed to talk to them or wanted to or needed to get something off my chest, people who I might have had one conversation with before who lived across the country, but they just sent me an email saying, I know what you're going through, I'm here for you. That meant so much, and it was just a handful at the time. So I think about even this week with the severe weather happening down south, if you know someone personally, just reach out to them and just show your support there for the weather community who's dealing with the disaster at the time. I think that's super important, because another one of the things visually that I can't get out of my mind from the Jefferson City tornado, of course, we mentioned how long it takes for a community to recover from a disaster. Surprisingly long for me at the time was the home insulation that was just scattered around and in random spots because it's so bright. It's pink, yellow, it looks like cotton candy. And it was just everywhere for the longest time. And I was able to bond with someone within the weather community about that who had also gone through a major tornado, and just being able to connect with them and realize that, you know, this is, again, like Christina said, a team effort, no matter what team it is, was really important. So I would encourage us as a weather community to continue to be there for one another across sectors, across the country, as these disasters continue to occur.
Well, it looks like we're 5 minutes past the hour, so I just want to conclude by thanking our panelists today for sharing their stories and their insight from those stories with the audience today. And hopefully, especially as we move into the heart of severe weather season and into another hurricane season and then eventually fire season, that the folks who attended today and those who will watch the recording will get something out of it. So again, thank you everyone. Thank you for those who attended today, and hope everyone takes care.